Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing building a budget. What we're going to talk about mainly is steps if you're building your first budget, where you can build your budget, some things to think about when developing a budget, and then really how a budget helps you. I think it's one of those things that's often overlooked as a key fundamental building block of getting your financial life set up. A lot of people jump straight to retirement savings or they jump straight to investing in a brokerage account or trying to buy property or some sort of income producing asset. When in reality, one of the key fundamental things you need to develop first is how to manage your income, how to manage your money, how to manage your expenses, and making sure that all of that is accurate so that you can go into those other aspects of building financial freedom and building wealth, knowing you have control on what's happening with your day to day spending. So, jumping into this, first, we're going to look at kind of some reasons why you would want to create a budget. So, first reason being, if we look at this top one, is making sure you are efficiently spending your money. So, what we typically see is unused subscriptions. A lot of people have, especially with multiple streaming services. If it's something you haven't watched, and I always say if it's been 3 months and you haven't watched it, you probably aren't going to watch it regularly. And you can drop that expense. And this could be little things too, little miscellaneous spending. Like if you're typically you always grab something out to eat, maybe trying to cook at home, whatever it might be, but just making sure that your spending is as efficient as possible. Second is making sure you are aware of your spending patterns. And I say aware of your spending patterns. If you're the type of person that's like, oh, it's only $5 here, $5 there, those can quickly add up. So just making sure you know kind of what you're spending your money on. And as you kind of develop your budget and track your spending, kind of see if you have any tendencies to overlook small purchases because they're small, but then make them really large amounts at the end of a month or at the end of a quarter. Next is it provides like a way to self evaluate yourself. So if you have goals in mind, but you're not necessarily sure how you're going to get to them, where you're going to get to them, where the money's going to come from. If you have a savings goal in mind, if it's, hey, by 35, I want at least one times my income in retirement accounts, or by 45, I want two times, three times my income in retirement accounts. How do I get there? What do I need to save? Knowing where your money goes is the first step in knowing where that money should go. So just doing a budget can provide a good way to evaluate how you are tracking your goals and then what you need to be doing to get those goals achieved at that point. And then it forces you to kind of anticipate problems a little bit more. So when you're doing a budget, you're creating kind of a mapping of where you want your money to go. So what it does is it forces you to plan ahead and say, okay, well, if I'm going to fit this in, I know at some point in time I'm going to have an emergency. I need a plan for that. I need to make sure I have money set aside for that. Or I have an expense that I know is really large. If it's homeowners insurance that you don't pay in your mortgage, if it's an HOA fee, if it's, you get your car serviced or whatever that might be, you can lot for that on a monthly basis, but you can bake it in and you can plan around it. So it's not a surprise and you're not being forced to kind of move money around on months where those expenses happen, that they don't necessarily happen every single month. And I'm using month here. Some people budget quarterly, some people budget annually, some people budget weekly. Month is just kind of a placeholder. And then two, it can be motivating. So it allows some clarity and kind of working towards your goals. So sometimes it's getting the first step is the hardest, and building a budget and having some sense of control over where your money's going, it can be really motivating to continue forward building your retirement plan, building wealth for yourself, and just taking control of your financial life going forward. A budget can be a great tool to start that and motivate yourself. Now, where do you build a budget? How do you build a budget? Luckily, there are a ton of apps out there that can help you develop a budget. I put a couple here: Every Dollar, Good Budget, Simplify. You Need a Budget is the Y that has a tree around it. It's called You Need a Budget. And then Mint are all very popular. They allow feed-in features for most of these. Most of these, they have a free version and they also have a paid version. The free version requires a little bit more legwork on your end, but The paid version can be kind of useful if you wanted to use that. If none of these work for you, and they won't all work for you, I mean, there's so many because all of them treat budgets slightly differently. And it's finding one that works for you. Because one of the big things is if it is a hassle and a chore to do your budget every month or every period that you're planning for, the likelihood of you sticking to it long term is fairly low. So you want to find something that makes it fairly easy for you, that fits in with your lifestyle, fits in with the way you think through your budget. And if none of these do it, you can always build your own. Like me personally, I don't use any of these. I have a spreadsheet that I manually update myself. It's the way I like to do a budget, it's the way I've been doing it for years. And it's something that I am able to track and know where I'm spending my money. But I've tried Every Dollar and Mint, and they're good applications, and I know a lot of people that use them and really enjoy them. But again, it's finding something that works for you that you can stick with. Now, some guidelines to starting a budget if you've never done it before. Make it flexible. So you don't want to make it so flexible that you're not sticking to anything, but there's going to be times where if you have, say, a grocery category, a gas category, an entertainment category, some of those are going to get a little bit over and some are going to be a little bit under. So don't sweat having grocery be a little bit over, but entertainment being a little bit under. Be flexible within kind of the guidelines. So give yourself some grace there. Keep the budget period short to start. And this is where I typically say if you're starting, don't try and budget out a year right off the bat. That's extremely overwhelming. Start with a month, start with a week, start with something where you can say, okay, I'm going to do this week and I'm going to track it. I'm going to make sure I stick to this, get comfortable with that, expand it, expand that time. So eventually you get to that year and it's a lot easier because essentially just a bunch of months you've already done really well building towards. Keep it simple and understandable. Do not try and create subcategories, make it all crazy and complicated right off the bat. Just get your basics set up, follow them, and you can build as you kind of grow in your budget tracking ability. Keep up with it. This is an obvious one, but if you're going to make a budget and then you don't actually do anything with the budget, you just spent a few hours building it and never did anything with it, it's essentially worthless. So don't do that. Keep your goals specific. Again, keep it specific, allow yourself some flexibility, but don't be so vague as say, hey, I'm only going to spend $500 this week between everything. That's not super helpful. You kind of want to have a little bit more specifics. And be like, I want to spend $500 this week, but I'm going to split that $500 between these 8 categories. That's not too bad. And then you kind of know where that money is going. If you're too vague with it, it's not going to be all that helpful. And then before starting, think through different variables. So before starting, what I typically recommend is look at your past month or past 2 month or past quarter spending, see kind of where you normally spend money, see what you've kind of had that's come up that's been a surprise, and then think through that as you build your budget going forward. That way you kind of know a starting point for where you need to go. Now, steps to building a budget. So, right off the bat, what we're going to do is you're going to estimate your income for that budget period. So, income being salary, commission, bonus, real estate, dividends, interest payments, anything like that. Now, with commission, you'll notice that there is some variableness to commission, and that's going to make it a little bit harder if you do have a variable compensation. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It is doable. It just takes a little bit more legwork. But first off, you want to know at least what income you have coming in. Next, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to look at what your expenses are. So you want to break those into 2 categories. You're going to want to break them into your fixed expenses, and then you're going to want to break them into your discretionary expenses. So fixed expenses, the things that are going to happen every month. And you'll notice that I added savings into this category. I added savings because you need to start thinking of that from a retirement planning and a wealth building as a fixed expense. It's not going to be something that's discretionary, but you need to make sure you bake that into something that is a priority for you. And then discretionary gifts, movies, entertainment, vacation, those are things that are going to be flexible. Your rent's not going to be flexible. Utilities, food, debt, clothing, your base needs aren't really going to have that much flexibility baked into them. Discretionary are going to be the things you can kind of tweak and move throughout the plan or throughout the month and budget and work with a little bit. Step 3 is discern like where are your shortfalls, where you have excesses. So if you have more income than you have expenses, great. Let's add some to savings. Make sure you're fully utilizing it. If we have more expenses than we have income, I mean, we got to figure out one, where those extra expenses are going and make adjustments for them. Step 4, make sure if you have a mismatch between income and expenses, you know what to do about it. And I really want to stress this point. If you have more income than expenses, we want to make sure that we are utilizing that income well. But if have more expenses than income, but you're planning on having more income, one thing I want to stress is do not assume your income is always going to grow. So with step 3, this is very much a follow through is when you make those adjustments, a lot of times I'll hear, oh, well, I know I'm going to get a raise next year, so that'll cover the extra spending I'm doing now. You don't know anything's going to happen next year. You don't know you're going to get a major commission. You don't know you're necessarily going to get a raise. You don't know if you're going to get a bonus. What you do know is what your income is now and what your expenses are. Do not keep expenses higher than what you can afford in expectations of earning more money, because earning more money often takes a lot more time than you would originally think. And 2, those expenses can really, really pile up and become extremely unmanageable, especially if you're pushing that to credit card debt or like high interest debt somewhere, you're taking out personal loans. Make sure you are planning for the income you have now, not the income you think you'll have later. Step 5, make sure everything is allocated how you want it. And when I say everything's allocated how you want it, if you are looking through your past few months and you realize, hey, I spend 40% of my income on going out to eat, and you're not okay with that, make sure you don't budget 40% of your income is entertainment at restaurants. Reallocate that. If you want to say, hey, I really only feel comfortable or would like to have 25% of my budget or 10% of my budget be restaurants or entertainment or this, move it to that and stick with it. So make sure you're efficiently allocating your spending within your budget. Do not just build it and say, hey, this is how I've been spending. This is how I'm going to keep spending. The whole idea of a budget is being able to set goals, meet those goals, and adjust and kind of redirect your financial life. So don't just make a budget and say, oh, this is what I've been doing. Now I'm just tracking it, because that's not really helpful either. You want to make sure you're using it to better your financial position going forward. Now, back to the conversation of what if you have variable income. It is possible to plan around variable income. It does take a little bit more work. So, what you really need to make sure you can nail down is one, the fixed aspect of your monthly expenses, and then the kind of variable aspect of your monthly expenses. So, that discretionary pile. So, you want to look at, all right, what's the lowest amount you can live on? First off, and then what's your typically highest amount? So, once you have that fixed and discretionary spending, then you're going to look at your income and say, all right, what's the highest income I've had? What's the lowest income I've had? You want to build a budget for that lowest income, and you want to build a budget for that highest income. You also might have to extend your time frame. So if you get paid commissions, but it's like a quarterly commission schedule, you need to budget out a quarter at a time to adjust for those. And then what you'll have to do is be a little bit stricter on your savings portion. So when the have that highest budget month coming in and quarter coming in, you can allot some of that extra savings to cover what might happen in your lowest budget. But you're essentially need to run 2 separate plans, one for a low income plan and one for a high income plan. And then you want to really make sure you're building out expenses over multiple periods. So when I say this, especially if it's something where you see one time of year you get higher income than others. So it's like you get a big bonus in the second quarter and big bonus in fourth quarter, but first quarter and third quarter of the year typically lower income quarters, but you have expenses that fall into those. Space those expenses out. So you're taking a little bit of that income in Q2 and in Q4 and saving it for your big expenses in Q1 and Q3. So again, it takes a little bit more work. It'll take a lot more hands-on movement. You'll probably have to build out longer time frames, but it is doable. It just needs to be paid attention to. So people say, "Well, I get paid commission. I can't do that." You can do it. It just requires a little bit more work to be done. Now, Keeping your debt to income in control. So once you have your budget built, one of the biggest things you need to look at is, all right, how much debt do I have on a monthly basis? And you might be saying, oh, I don't have any debt. I don't have credit cards. Mortgage counts as debt. Car payments count as debt. Anything that is an obligation that you have to pay. Now, a good rule of thumb is to keep your debt to income ratio below 36%. So that's 30%, 6% of your income should be or should not be more than debt. So not should be debt, but 36 is kind of the max. If you see that you have enough kind of regular payments and debt that it gets to be 40% of your income, 50% of your income, 60% of your income, you really need to make a focus on getting that down, because what that allows you essentially to do is say, all right, well, if I'm at 36 or lower of debt, it gives you more ability to save, it gives you more flexibility for emergencies, and it's going to be generally easier for you to see yourself building wealth and meeting goals than if pretty much every spare penny you have is going towards some sort of debt or interest payment. Now, most of the time, I typically recommend that this is net. So, this is your after tax earnings, not your gross earnings, but your after tax earnings. You should keep that 36% based on net income. Some people will say it's gross. It's kind of an argument back and forth. I tend to lean on the side of what you can actually spend, and that would be your net income. So, to find that, what you typically say is you take your monthly debt payments, divide it by your monthly income, and then times that by 100. So we have, if your monthly income is 5,000 and you pay 1,500 between like a mortgage and a car payment, you divide that, times it by 100, and that would be 30%. So your debt to income ratio is at 30%. So that's going to be what to do after you build that first budget, to see, all right, how much of my income is going towards debt? And then if it's above 36%, start figuring out ways to pay that debt down faster. And that's going to be your first thing you're going to want to work on. Now, final thoughts. Again, building a budget is something that I think is extremely important when it comes to financial planning, because it's really the foundation, it's the starting point. If you're just throwing money at a retirement account or at a 401k and you don't have a budget, you're doing half of a job, because not only does it a budget allow you to kind of really make sure you're directing enough funds where they need to go, a budget also kind of tells you what you're spending and what you need to plan for. So if you don't have an idea of what you spend on a monthly basis, but you're saving into your retirement account, well, what are you saving for? Are you just saving for retirement? That's not super helpful, because what does that retirement look like? Are you saving enough to spend 4,000 a month, 5,000 a month? Do you know how much you need to spend in retirement? If you don't have an idea of how much you spend, or don't have a budget to kind of tell you how much you spend, do you know you're even saving enough? Are you saving too much? Because you don't know how much you'll need to average your spending in retirement. So, building a budget, not only is it useful for the right now, it is also extremely useful in prepping and planning for retirement spending and what you need in retirement and your savings goals to meet that spending in retirement, because it allows you to have an idea of what that spending is going to follow through to in retirement, what expenses are going to drop off, what expenses are going to jump on in retirement, and you can start to map that out. But it all starts with building that initial budget and having control of what you spend on a day to day. Thanks. Please feel free to check out our other videos, and we'll keep posting more and more on here.